with this introduction, and welcome to all of you, I would now like to start the talks. We have our Professor Kannan, whom I have known for the last several years.
Namaskar.
So I have known him for several years. People get surprised and amazed at the level of command he has got on English particularly. This is very rare. Such a traditional scholar with a very strong grounding in shaastras, having such an amazing command over English that even English scholars would have to learn from him in certain aspects of the command of the language. And also he ventures into many contemporary areas of knowledge also, legal studies, jurisprudence, and other areas. And when he quotes from contemporary disciplines like psychology, gestalt theory of psychology, or whatever, that shows a very good mastery over both sides of scholarship. So we are going to hear from him how his life itself, autobiographically, he's going to explain to us how he started as a Shastra student, how his gurus laid foundations in him, and what aspects of his life made him get interested in modern scholarship also. Actually, this is a very interesting question of history, modern history. Why traditional scholars were dragged into modern scholarship? What made them learn, for example, English so well? I request Professor Kannan to give us an autobiographical sharing of how he could reach that peak of Mount Everest, and where he started and how he scaled it. Thank you.
Namaskar, Patariji, for inviting me. As you know, I was quite hesitant in involving myself in this series of talks. I would rather love to be a listener and watcher of other giants. In fact, I requested that mine be the first talk because we can pass on to the more interesting and more important lectures that will be given by others.
You are very humble, sir. You are very humble. You are modest, but we know
I must
how
be modest
great.
about. So, anyhow, this talk has made me turn autobiographical, which I generally would not like to be. The one thing that I learned from Anand Kumar Swami was that to speak about oneself is a swargya, and therefore seldom have I spoken about myself and what work I have done. And here the circumstances have been such that I am asked to speak about how I progressed. So what little progress I have done. As a young boy, I studied in a government school in a Kannada medium. So it's only in the high school that I had to switch over to the English medium. And I found English quite tough a language then. And there was also when I joined the Prathama class in Sanskrit, where Panchatantra, one chapter of Panchatantra was taught, and I had some exposure to Shabdas, Dhatus, and Amarakoshas to some extent. And there was also the time when, as per the traditional norms, we were supposed to recite some stotras in the evening, and that was when I was exposed to some stotras of Vedanta Deshika, And when I was in high school, in the 10th standard, there was one state level competition for 10th standard students conducted by one organization affiliated to Kanchi Swamiji. So that was called Amara Bharati, in which I had got the gold medal. So a sort of pride developed in me that I know Sanskrit to some extent and all that. And as I won a number of prizes in several competitions in the high school, I was gifted one book called Pearls of Wisdom, authored by D.S. Sharma, published by Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. And it was when I read that book that my pride was humbled. So that book contains nothing but citations from Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads on over a dozen topics. So, and there, when I could hardly understand the sentences from the Upanishads, that I felt ashamed that I really did not know Sanskrit. And that is also when the exposure to the stotras of Vedanta Deshika, that I got to know that he was an excellent and extraordinary polymath. So that was the first polymath that I could come across. And what are his fields of specialization? It's a Jyotish, Chandas, Shabdashastra Pravina, Kavya Shreni, Rupakalankritajnaha, Mimamsayam, Brahma Karmanugayam, Srashta, Sakshat, Sarvatantra, Sutantra, Sankhye, Yoge, Bhattatantre, Gurukte, Shaive, Jaine, Shankare, Bhaskare, Cha, Shastre, Bauddhe, Yadave, Garvitanam, Pratyakhyata, Sarvatantra, Sutantraha, Bharadwaj, Shandil, Yahari, the Mukhya Smritistom, Sukshmartha Nirniti Dakshaha, Purana, Gamadi, Shvasadharana Shri Shrihi, Sutobhati Lokeshwa, Anantarya Surehi. So this was the first giant that I had some exposure to, and learning his stotras and seeing the tough language, but the highly grammatical language that he wrote in, so was something inspiring. At the same time, I had exposure to some scholarship of my uncles. So 4 of them. So all had expertise in 2 or 3 shastras each. So one uncle of mine edited Kautilya's Arthashastra. That is subsequent to Shama Shastri's edition. There were many more editions of Arthashastra with an exhaustive index and detailed content and an excellent introduction and so on. He was also a versatile scholar by name N.S. Venkatnathacharya, so who edited Saundarya Lahari, of course, subsequent to Mahadev Shastri into theirs in the Oriental Library of Mysore. So he was there. Another uncle of mine who taught in Maharaja Samskrita College, Mysore, by name N.S. Ramabhadracharya, he was also a Mahamahopadhyaya, and he was a professor of both Prachina Nyaya and Navya Nyaya. And he brought out one of the excellent editions of Sri Bhashya from Melkoti. So these are all very great scholars. Though tragically or comically, I hardly learned much from them. So it was when I went to college, especially in my pre-university classes and BSc classes, that I had a taste of the rigor of mathematics and simply fell in love with mathematics. And it was also those days where I read Champu Ramayana, Mudra Rakshasa, and Yashogunadasa Champu in particular. And what I sought to do then was to read the translation first and try to form sentences in my own way to see how it can match with the original. Of course, it was nowhere near the original, but that struggle showed the gap that there was between an accomplished writer and a beginner. So, and that gap gradually began to reduce a bit. So, of course, even now I cannot claim any high standard of writing in Sanskrit, but I surely can write some sensible Sanskrit. Those are also the days when I had caught a fancy for writing shlokas in Sanskrit, and even when I was in first BSc, I had composed a shloka in Sraddha meter on Shivaji. So it read something like this: Hindu dharmam rirakshur nikilamopanijam jivitam yo juhava virashuro tadiro ripukula emaru potra panchasitulyaham vechan dushtan balishtan prakaramati balad hindunam hindu satsanga shaktya sarvan yadrava yadyo mamabhavata spurti kendro narendraha. So that was the shloka that I had written when I was in first BSc. And there was also the time when I had thought of systematizing Sanskrit grammar to some extent, and I invented a method of easing the learning of the Tinganta Rupas, which are the most difficult ones, which are hard not to crack, and even sound scholars so would be afraid of confidently using them. And therefore, I wrote one work called Dhaturupa Kosha. I selected some 360 most commonly used roots and gave the forms in all the 10 lakaras. Now, the problem with works like Madhyama Dhaturupavali or Brihad Dhaturupavali and so on is that they give just a few forms and say the rest of the forms are like the other dhatu. They give it as a reference. And if you go and look into that, you surely cannot arrive at the correct and full forms. And therefore, there must be a way, I thought, where one is 100% sure that this is the form in all the 10 lakaras. So in all the purushas and all the vachanas. And therefore, I devised one method by which I would give the Prathama Purusha Ekvachana form followed by a number, and following that number, one can get all the other forms. And that was the compactest ever way of presenting the forms in 10 lakaras. In a matter of just some 250 pages, I had covered the 360 forms, 360 roots in all the 10 lakaras. And this is the book that you may see. It is all printed in Kannada, unfortunately, because I thought I may commit some errors, and therefore, with some suggestions from people, I must bring out a Sanskrit edition. I am shortly bringing out one, but that is the compact. I also wrote one Kridanta Rupa Kosha, so where also I followed the same method of numbering the pratyayas and adhering to the same order throughout the book. Now, of course, that method is now followed in even Janardhan Hegde's Kridanta Rupa Nandini and so on. But if people follow my method of presentation, they can save a lot of space and bring a lot of clarity in knowing this. This idea of writing a book on such lines occurred to me even while I was in first BSc, though I brought out that book much later. So after I joined as a lecturer. So I was barely 20 when I joined as a lecturer. So while I studied MA, so I would go to the library. So I have a sort of a bad habit of going through all the books in libraries. So when I was studying MA, I had an exposure to polymathic works like Shivatattva Ratnakara. I read a few books on tantras, for example, Lakshmi Tantra, Hiribhadni Samhita, Mahanirvana Tantra, many texts on yoga. So, for example, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Shatchakra Nirupana, and so on and so forth. Many of these texts I read on my own. So, and once again, for example, the commentary of Lakshmidhara on Saundarya Lahari, where he exudes confidence. He says, Vayameha padavidyam tantram anvikshikim va yadipati upate va kupate va vartayamas panthaha udayati dishiyasyam bhanuman saiva purva nahi tarani rudite dikparadhena vrittihi. So such confidence of his knowledge in multiple shaastras that he had, so was something extraordinary. And while I was studying for my ME, then itself I could see how our poets and our shastrakaras would leave nothing under the sun. Take, for example, the task of a poet. What is the norm that is prescribed for him? Nasa shabdo, nadadvachyam, nasa nyayo, nasa akala, jayate yanna kavyangam, aho bharo mahan kavehe. So no department of knowledge would not come under one's study. Or, for example, in inter-shaastra, which says, Natat jnanam, natat shilpam, nasa vidya, nasa kala, naso yogo, natat karma, natyesmin yenna drishyate. And therefore, every shastra was thus important. In Sushruta's words, the person who studies only one field, confines himself to but one field of specialization, is useless. He says, Ekam shastram adhiyanaha navidya shastra nishchayam tasmad bahushaastravitva vijaniya chikitsakaha. And therefore, such were the norms of multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity that is demanded of scholars from various fields. And while reading the Abhitistava of Vedanta Deshika, he had given a warning about terrorism all over the world. So he clearly stated, Turushka Yavanadi Bhir Jagati Jirbhamanam Bhayam. So it holds good even to this day, that kind of social awareness that he had, that he gave a warning. So his keen sense of observation was very evident. Now, as a teacher, my interests continued in various fields, and I very well remember a letter that I wrote to Mahamukhaprajnaa N. Rangnath Sharma in Arya Meter. So, and he was himself very much appreciative of the polish in the language and the adherence to the strict norms of the meter and so on. There was also the time when I read Cardona's Panini survey of research and got to know the wealth of literature. So books like V.S. Agrawala's India as Known to Panini, etc. These are all some of the things that I had exposure to. But much more than all these, I had the fortune of meeting one important person by name Professor Kannan, introduced to me by our dear friend Venkatakrishna. So Kannan was a professor of architecture, and he was a person who was most devoted, almost a bhakta of Ananda Kumar Swami, and he introduced me to the various writings of Ananda Kumar Swami. It is difficult to come across a giant and a polymath like Ananda Kumar Swami. So he is most famous for his dance of Shiva, but he is indeed a scholar colossus in the true sense of the term. He was a geologist and a doctorate in science, but he became an eminent art historian. He was posted in Ceylon as a geologist, but he saw the local arts were undergoing decay on account of the colonial rule, and he started a society for the protection of local arts and handicrafts. And this took him deeper into the meaning of art and the purpose of art. And it is he who espoused, for example, much before Hiriyana, that art is indeed yoga. So in his book on essays and national idealism, so you can see that he brought out many aspects of these, and he was a master of multiple languages, say a dozen languages like Sanskrit, Pali, Greek, and Latin, German, French, Persian, Chinese, and so on. So, and he was also a master of folklore and mythology, and a thorough scholarship of the Vedic literature. So his spiritual authority and temporal power is a magnum opus, and those who want to know what are the problems of interpretation of the Vedic literature and how to tackle them should get an exposure to his massive work. Actually, it's a very small work. It runs to about just 80 pages, but enough to fill 800 or much more pages of commentary upon that work. So that way, scholars like Hiriyana and even D.V. Gundappa look like so very small scholars in front of his gigantic scholarship. And this kind of exposure to polymathy was something that inspired me, and I would spend hours and hours and hours reading Ananda Kumar Swami, and perhaps there is not a scrap of paper or a single line of Kumar Swami that I have missed reading, and I have much to do regarding Ananda Kumar Swami. And later I had some occasion to not just visit, but stay at IIT Bombay, IIT Kanpur, and IIT Delhi. So when I was at IIT Kanpur, so there was some work going on under the leadership of Dr. Vinit Chaitanya, and he asked me one simple question. Do you know the Sutra Swatantra Karta? So what is Swatantriya there? What do you mean by a Karta is Swatantra? Now, I knew the meaning of the word Swatantra, but I did not know how it is interpreted in Vyakarana Shastra. And that once again put me to shame about my own ignorance. And therefore, I took leave for about a week and went straight to Yudhishthira Mimamsaka ji. And I stayed in that Panini Mahavidyalaya, Haryana, Sonipat for about a week there. And of course, Yudhishthira Mimamsaka was already too old. And however, he was quite impressed because I spoke to him in Sanskrit, and he said he has not come across many people who could speak this Sanskrit. And I sought his permission to look into his library, and he gave me full freedom. So for something like 3 full days, I went through each and every book in his personal collection, and it was undoubtedly an extraordinary collection. So that also took me to some exposure to artificial intelligence. So because I wanted to know what is it that people are saying that Sanskrit is the best language for computers and so on. So on the one hand, it looked nonsensical, and on the other hand, it looked like a big claim, and therefore I wanted to see the truth of it. And those were the days when I read almost all the top leaders then of artificial intelligence, like Roger Schank, Terry Winograd, Marvin Minsky, Dreyfus, Nilsson, and so on. So I did one good mischievous thing. So there was a good deal of corruption at IIT Kanpur library, and I befriended the assistant librarian who had his own Xerox shop, and there arrived in the library the Encyclopedia of Artificial Intelligence. It was published in 1987, so barely an year after I was there, and I asked him whether he could get me that book. He said, this book cannot be lent out at all. It's purely for reference, being an encyclopedia. But he had an underhand arrangement, and he had his own Xerox shop, and overnight he Xeroxed the entire encyclopedia for me. And that encyclopedia contains something like 1,250 pages, and cover to cover, I read an encyclopedia. And it is when a person reads an encyclopedia done by some of the best scholars, so that one can get to know what it is to state in a sharp, precise, and concise language. I had myself a good exposure to the language of Ananda Kumar Swami, which, as against that of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, in spite of being flowery. So Kumaraswamy's language is almost mathematical in structure. There is not a single word that can be called a waste, and there is not a single word that is not extremely. You can perform Dalakritya on Anand Kumaraswamy's writings, and you can see how he proceeds mathematically. So, unlike, say, Dr. Radhakrishnan and so on. That is also the time when I got interested in various linguistic issues, and I similarly got Xerox from the same library of David Crystal's Encyclopedia of Language. So it's over 400 pages, and I got them Xeroxed and read them cover to cover. So I was also interested in history and philosophy of science, and I attended there a course on history and philosophy of science. So, and it was during that period that I studied, or I should say, I read cover to cover the entire Nyayakosha of Jhalakikara. So I can only say that in all these encyclopedic works, I must have understood something like 70 to 80%, not more. So, however, that was an exercise that I did. I also similarly read the Sanskrit Kannada dictionary of Chakravarti Srinivasa Gopalacharya, also cover to cover something like 2,900 pages. And that is when I got very much interested in the Karaka theory, because that, you see, is the crux of Panini's work, and it was regarding that the central work that was going on at IIT Kanpur. And I had seen how, for example, Dr. K. Krishnamurti had committed a very serious blunder in equating Prathamaka Vibhakti and Kritrikaraka, and he was duly taken to task by Vidwan Ranganath Sharma and criticized. Dr. Vinay Chaitanya asked me to read John F. Sowa's conceptual structures, information processing in mind and machine, and that was an eye-opener because there was a confluence of various fields like logic and philosophy, linguistics and computer science, and that was an eye-opener for me. And at the same time, I remembered how Professor V.N. Jha of Pune had a wonderful way of presentation, a diagrammatical way of presentation actually devised by his own student, so a Japanese student. And I showed this to Dr. Vinay Chaitanya, and he was quite impressed. And you can see that the modern presentations of Navya Nyaya in diagrammatic and conceptual fashions. So started with that. So reaching it, one of its peaks, perhaps in the work of Gokul Madhavan at Harvard University, who has a very thorough knowledge of mathematics. So which level of knowledge of mathematics Professor Jha lacked, but he has that scholarship. Now, it was while I studied in that period, I read Vakyapadya, and once again, I was exposed to the kind of polymathy that Vyakarana Shastra itself is. So, Punya Raja and Hela Raja, with those commentaries, and Ambakartri, those commentaries, I have read many portions of Vakyapadya, and there it is very clearly stated, Sarva Veda Parishadam Hidam Shastram, Tatra Naikah Panthaha Shakyaha Asthatum. So, absolute absence of bigotry. So, and setting aside their own ontology, the grammarians would look into the ontology of other schools also, and their botheration was how they get expressed in language. And so Punyaraja says, Pratikshiptam api paksham vyavaharartham angikarotyeva tikakaraha yataha sarva parshadam hi vyakarana shastram. So Vyakarana Shastra is something that pertains to every field, Sarva Parishat, and therefore we would not be bigots of adhering to but one field. And there was also the time, say afterwards, when I wrote, edited Virupaksha Vasantotsav Champu. It's a 100-page book, but with my notes, it swelled into 640 pages. So you can look into the bibliography. It cites more than 270 works, and with something like 2,250 endnotes. Similarly, I wrote a work on theoretical foundations of Ayurveda in English, and that also contains similar references and so on. And yeah, this is the book, Theoretical Foundations of Ayurveda, and it's something like 500 pages. And there, my pratigna was as one of Vagbhata. So, na matra matramapyatra kinchid agama varjitam. So, there is no statement for which a proper citation from the original is not given, and full reference for the citation is given chapter and verse. So, subsequently, while I worked at Jain University, I edited along with Professor R. Nayangar a work called Narada Shilpa Shastra, so which has to do with Vastu. And my one habit of going through libraries, for example, the some 2,000 to 3,000 books at IIT Kanpur library, it is all visually fixed in my mind. So similarly, as I told you, the Library of Yudhishthira Vyomasaka, the Library of Indian History World Culture, the Library of Jaikar Library at Pune, and also Deccan College Library, VVRI Library, Hoshiarpur. So all the images of whatever books that I need and where they are, so I could locate them. So I have often been scolded by librarians that I am not interested in one book and I am searching for something and probably trying to steal something or whatever. So much more than all these things. So among the various references that I given in Virupaksha Vasantotsav Champu, I just wanted to mention that I have quoted from Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, Dharmasutras, and Smriti, Puranas, Tantras, Agamas, Mimamsa, Purva, and Uttara, Sankhya, and Yoga, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika texts. So from Chandas texts, Alankara texts, Vyakarana texts, of course, Gadya, Padya, Mahakavya, Khandakavya, Nataka, Champu, Kamashastra, Samudrika, Vedanta. So stotra, alankara, tarka, kosha, nirukta, texts like Mahabhashya, Vakyapadiya, Punyaraja, Heraraja, so Ambakati and so on. So numerous works I have cited from. So, and of course, when you say Polymaths, so all our say Wikipedia or encyclopedia will mention Leonardo da Vinci, Plato and Aristotle, Isaac Asimov, and then Schrodinger, Newton and Leibniz. So, but unfortunately, they do not mention Ananda Kumar Swami. Of course, in our own tradition, we have Shudraka, Bhoja, Deshika, Vedanta Deshika, Abhinavagupta, Malinatha, and others. So, who are all very versatile. But much more than all these was my coming to get to know of Sriranga Mahaguru, 1913 to 1969. So himself a versatile genius and a master yogin, and who was the embodiment of polymathy, for whom there was absolutely no difference between science and shastras. So, as Eric Gill would say of Ananda Kumar Swami, I would say that I'd be proud to call myself a disciple of his, but I am afraid I may be embarrassing him. So he was also a musician, and his knowledge of shastras was all thoroughly practical. Take, for example, the performance of Shraddha or say the Tarpana and the Snana that we do during Grahana. Now, his scientific approach was such that he would say that just looking at his nadi, he was a thorough master of that, and he was thoroughly original. He learned this from nobody. He was also a master of yoga, learned from nobody. So his knowledge of Nadi Shastra was such that so you could put him in a dark room, all windows and the doors closed, absolutely no light. So give him a watch with, say, altered timings and all that. So he would tell, so when the Grahana starts and when the Grahana ends, and what is the progress of the Grahana, and how he would demonstrate how, for example, the usage of Darbha, so nullifies the effect of Grahana and so on. So every field was something that is practical to him. And of Ananda Kumar Swami, I spoke in Gokhale Institute in 2005. So I gave some 5 lectures continuously. I could perhaps give some 50 lectures on the work of Sriranga Mahaguru. So such an extraordinary genius that he was. So in the various works that I edited working with Rajiv Malhotra, I brought out 7 volumes in the Swadeshi Indology conference series, refuting the Western biases and especially targeting Sheldon Pollock, as he was considered the last pundit, so to say. I very well realized that mastery of 4 languages, I have spoken this from several platforms, mastery of 4 languages is very essential for a person to become a polymath nowadays. And those 4 languages are: number 1, Sanskrit; number 2, English; number 3, mathematics; and number 4, Navinyaya. So these 4 languages open up vast horizons of knowledge to any person. So they say in Kannada, Desha Suttu Kosha Odu, to realize your ignorance. And to this day, I follow that, and especially the latter, and so on. It is said of a specialist almost disparagingly that it's he who knows almost everything about almost nothing. But in the case of polymaths, so we find, for example, regarding even Rama and Krishna, so their knowledges were in no way ordinary. So, for example, of Rama, it has been said, Veda Vedanga Tattvagnyaha Dhunur Vedecha Nishtitaha Sarvashastrartha Tattvagnyaha Smritiman Pratibhanavan. He was known as Vidwan and Atmavan and so on. And at the same time, even writing the best of poetry, the yogic and spiritual grounding of Valmiki and Vyasa is very clearly known. So, for example, in the Ramayana itself, it is said, Tatah Pashiti Dharmatma Tat Sarvam Yogamastitaha. And Krishna is said to have learned the 64 Vidyas under Sandipani, so in 64 days. So in the Mahabharata, also it is said, so apashyat sarvam antataha. So it is all within himself that he beheld the Mahabharata. So if we look into Dhanyalokakara and Abhinavagupta, we see the important and sound base and basis provided by Yoga Shastra and spirituality. And as Anandavardhana says, that he has a thorough mastery over poetry and over the Shastras. And yet he says that neither of these can provide a kind of joy that's equal to even a small percentage of bhakti in the Lord. So he says, Ya Vyaparavati Rasan Rasaitam Kachit Kavinam Nava Dishtirya Parinishtitartha Vishayon Mesha Cha Vaipishyati Te Dve Apyavalambya Vishwamanisham Nirvarnayanto Vayam Shanta Naivacha Labdham Abdi Shayana Tad Bhakti Tulyam Sukham. And even stronger, so even though Vishwanatha calls Kavyananda as Brahmananda Sahodara, so Abhinavagupta himself, the giant non-parallel, who says, Tadananda viprunmatra vabhaso hi rasaswadaha ityuktam pragasmabhihi. So the kavyaswada or the rasaswada is something that's but a small, very trivial aspect of the Brahmananda. So Tadananda viprunmatra, it's not even viprunmatra avabhasa, he says, he rasaswadaha. So such were these people who were deeply rooted in yoga. Abhinavagupta calls himself the son of a yogini. So he's a yogini putra. And because of their deep grounding in the Adhyatma Shastra, it was that they could write such works which would show them, take them to the very depths and the foundation of knowledge. So as we see, Sahasranama, Yogo, Jnanam, Sankhyam, Vidya, Shilpadi, Karmacha, Veda, Shastrani, Vijnanam, Etat Sarvam Janardhanat, their primary source is there in the Supreme. And it is in order to lead us towards that, see, all these Shastras are taken up. But what one must also remember is that the Shastras require a constant cultivation. So all that I read, the entire encyclopedia of artificial intelligence I read cover to cover has now become totally outdated, and it has the field has progressed so fast and so much. But however, as Einstein says, it is not the facts that one has to remember. Education consists in the samskara that after all the facts are forgotten, the impression that leaves and that's left behind in you is what is education. So shastram suchintita matho parichintaneyam aradhito nripati parisevaniyaha anke dhritapi taruni parirakshaniya shastre nripecha yuvatau cha kuto ushitvam. So one has to be constantly in touch with the Shastras, and as they say, Kshanadurdham, Dinadurdham Avayyakaranaha, Kshanadurdham Atarkikaha, and so on. So my exposure to the various modern things is something that has made me feel that the more I have studied the Western productions in terms of science or whatever, so the higher has been my regard for the East, and science has to go a long, long way in getting to realize the values and the valuable things in our own tradition. And one thing that I have spent more time on is knowing where to look. So my browsing through libraries and massive libraries at that, so has been to get to know where is what. And in fact, a pursuit like that would greatly help people getting to know where they have to look for. And that way, I am perhaps more fit to be a sort of an assistant librarian than a very sound scholar. But then that has been the nature of my looking into various branches of knowledge. And the command over Sanskrit, I cannot exactly call it a command, was exhibited in one of my verses which I composed in Devi Parishad. So in appreciation of the excellent attitude and ability to reconcile opposing groups by Professor Pottery. So I composed this verse, Paraspara Parivada Parihara Parayanaha Prayatna Pottery Protha Prashamsayai Prakalpate. So, so commendable is he, a master of reconciliation, and that's how this has been the academic journey of mine in brief, though I would seldom like to be autobiographical. In fact, I remember one student of mine remarking that I had been very close to that family, and I had been going there, spending a few hours every week for almost 3 years. And I was asked, you have been here with us for 3 years. You have not said anything about yourself. So I somehow feel very reticent to speak about myself, and the very antithesis of the same has happened today, where I have been asked to speak about my academic career. So I have said what little I could contribute to this group, and I look forward to many of the eminent scholars who are to speak today, and I have much to learn from them, is what I feel. So I hope I have not exceeded my time. So I thank you, Professor Pottery and others, for providing me this opportunity and platform to speak a few words. And I hope at least some aspects of these can be of some use to some people. The gigantic scholar Anand Kumar Swami himself said that all that he had written would maybe perhaps useful to some 4 or 5 persons. So when that is the case, I do not know to whom this may benefit. But anyhow, I could not say no to the persuasion of Professor Pottery to speak here. I thank you very much, Professor Pottery and others, for patiently listening to me. Namaskar, everybody.
Thank you very much, sir. You are so humble that you have not agreed in the beginning when I asked you to speak because you were hesitant to speak autobiographically. But today, audience got benefited to know how you were able to achieve such a colossal scholarship. Almost you have done the apportionment of many libraries and all that knowledge speaks through whatever comes out of your expressions. Usually we don't take many questions, but there is one question. The member Vishakha Ketrapal, he is thanking Indica for introducing us, for introducing you to them. And he is saying, Namaste, Professor Kannan. In your personal experience, how does being a polymath enrich our life and thinking? Second question is, what practices can one do in daily life to prepare ourselves to absorb knowledge from versatile fields or to become a polymath? What should we do?
My first forays into polymathy was in reading a book of quotations. So when you read a book of quotations, whether it is in English or a book of shaastras in Sanskrit, you will see that the author will have said in a minimum number of words, so he will have given a very deep idea. So that kind of speaking in a pithy manner, so one gets to know when one reads books of quotations, number one. Number two, most people do not look into the dictionary quite often, but on the other hand, it is something that one must regularly do. I remember how in the beginning of the first 1 or 2 years of my teaching. So I read cover to cover Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. So that dictionary focuses on actual usage. It is not just a question of meanings of words. Now, words have their boundaries, and it is only when a person develops a thorough knowledge of the personality of words that one gets to speak and write in a precise manner. And this precision of thinking and precision in expression are very fundamental to progress. And the moment one develops these things, he can see that whichever shastra he tries to get into, that sharpness is something very important. And this I could see in Dr. Vinay Chaitanya. So he would ask me to read a paragraph and ask questions just on that paragraph, and the questions would be so penetrating that it's only a person who has thoroughly mastered that can really answer such questions. And therefore, whatever you read with focus and concentration, and much more than shravana, that is manana, that is required, and revision is what is required. And with all the memory cultivations that have been propounded in the West, they have ultimately arrived at the system of parayana as the best method of cultivation. So my memory is actually very poor. I hardly remember 8 to 10% of what all I have read. But then I made it a very important task to remember what is in what. So, for example, I used to regularly go through the contents of every book and then read the preface, which many people miss, and then look into the index and so on. Regarding the other question, how does it help in life? Now, for example, it shows you how to view life in a deeper manner. Just as in Yoga Shastra, the development of any one of the limbs in yoga. So we have the 8 limbs called yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So progress in any one can help progress in many others. So even so, this helps a person. So it's not a stupid knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So Ananda Kumar Swami refuted these things. So art for the sake of art, knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So these are stupid approaches to life. So, and one must know in what way does it play an important role in one's life, and therefore look into what helps you in life. And a good deal of what I have read has made my understanding of life better and deeper. And the reverence for our tradition should spring from a proper understanding. And that happens only when you have this kind of polymathic approach. Otherwise, many things look very simple and superficial, but it's only, I should say that our kavyas have a sort of a deceptive simplicity, and it is only when you go deep, for example, the works of Kalidasa, his knowledge of Sankhya and Yoga, for example, which is the chief message of the Mahabharata. So Kalidasa has thorough knowledge of that. So and Vedanta, so he's very well reflected in his works, and his understanding of life is all the more rich and deep on account of his polymathy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for such a patient response to the question.